Okay, welcome to our channel once again. Today we are talking about EVs, electric vehicles. I think in our previous videos we've always been discussing issues on inequalities and the environment, but we move on to more practical aspects of how these things affect us on a daily basis. And so today, looking at the future of vehicles in the UK, I'm sure it's all over the world, but we will talk about what we know here in the UK. There is that ruling from the Mayor of London that all the new fleets that are coming onto the private hire must be full electric and zero emission. Now, this will actually make the bulk of vehicles operating within the M25, basically operating within Greater London. The private hire makes the bulk of the numbers. But obviously, we have the buses that have mostly converted into zero emissions and are mostly electric. And then also, we have a lot of the taxis as well. And obviously, a lot of private fleet all turning into electric. But the question, obviously, as critics and also human rights advocate, most of our work sometimes may seem maybe reasonably negative, i.e., you're always criticizing issues and you are not necessarily the most liked person if you decide to do these things. However, as part of the checks and balances within governance, it is necessary that when these decisions are made and they are talked about so nicely as if they work in a perfect environment, we realize that on the practice, when it comes to the practice, there are a lot of challenges that are not necessarily thought through. And so we talk about these or we criticize these ideas as a way of helping to sort of rethink or go back to the drawing board and plug in basically the shortcomings of some of these ideas. So, as we know, the future for vehicles in the UK are going to be full electric. From Transport for London, it is known that from 2040, diesel and normal petrol cars will never be sold in the UK again. And so the idea is that everything is going to go electric. But the purpose of this video is to find out how practical is it for all vehicles to go electric. Do we have the infrastructure to support this change when it really comes? Or it's actually, well, it's happening right now. But as it gains momentum, would we have the infrastructure to support this idea of full electric? Or one will say, are hybrids, self-charging hybrids, the level at which we are now? Is this what should be made mandatory for now rather than pushing for the full electric? So in this video, we are going to be looking at there's an article in the Independent. I am going to check who wrote this article. Obviously, that talks about EVs. This article is written on the 5th of December. I'm just gonna try and pick the person's name. Okay, when we get into it, we will discuss that. So this is all about understanding electric vehicle charging, the practical aspect, understanding how it's costed and how this relates to the ordinary guy that decides to buy an electric vehicle. I mean, from my own understanding, if you go back to this issue of inequality, you realize that the concept of electric vehicle it's not really there for the ordinary guy on the street. It's, one should say, it's a little bit very much so a bourgeois thing, on the basis of Tesla leading the pack in this sort of batteries and the chargers and the cars, the vehicles. Number one is the cost of these vehicles. Does all people have access to raise funds, or do they have the funding available for the purchasing of these vehicles? That's number one. Number two, how does it work? For it to really work for you, you need to have a house, but not just an ordinary house, but a house with a drive. So you may have a house where you don't have a drive, or you may live in an apartment where you don't have a drive. You may live in a flat somewhere you don't have a drive. And in reality, these cars are not designed for you, or you are not going to be making that maximum benefit if you should decide to buy an electric vehicle. But sometimes people are not buying electric vehicles because they want to. The majority of workers, in the private hire industry are actually conditioned by Transport for London to actually buy these electric vehicles. Obviously, currently as it stands, if you have an electric vehicle, or if you've had it for a while, you would have not been paying congestion charge, but this is due to come to an end by December 2025. So from December 2025, you are going to be hit with a £10 charge a day for driving your electric vehicle, be it a private hire person or a private person. You will be paying this. And so just to give a little brief on the infrastructure, the challenges that I have personally faced, that is, I have a house, I don't have a drive, has been the fact that with the electric vehicle, how do I charge it? And how do I get to understand the cost of the charging? So once I have this electric vehicle, I now started to realize the practical side, whereby you may go to a charging point. Obviously, within your car, you will be able to locate where the charging points are. And so once you find those charging points, you go, if it's in a filling station where they have about maybe 5 or 6 units charging, you may then find that you get there and then there is a point for you to charge. But then each charging station may have a different service provider, and they all want you to download an app. And so you can imagine that you may probably need to download about 10 apps. Just a bit like going to a Shell, going to a BP, going to a Tesco, going to a Sainsbury, going to all these different places to buy your fuel, which you can basically do on the go. On these charging stations, you may have to download apps for each one of them and subscribe. To subscribe, to do a membership subscription, to be able to obtain some kind of a discount. And imagine that if you have about 10 service provider, if you've subscribed to about 10 of them and they are all taking something like $8.99, I know about the Tesla one is $8.99, and they are taking this amount from you, from your account every month. This may not be so economical. Not only that, the charging on the go can also be another expensive business. Then you also have challenges where I have experienced this, and this is part of the reasons why I'm interested in making this video, to share this idea, and obviously people that may have had similar experiences, how they got out of it, and obviously share this knowledge so that anybody that is intending to buy an electric vehicle may have to bear such things in mind. So I have a situation where I was advised that Tesla's supercharging were actually the most reasonable. So you have such a huge range. For example, Shell could charge you 89 pence per kilowatt hour, right? Apparently, Tesla may be doing it for 43 pence per kilowatt hour. BP Pulse 77 pence per kilowatt hour. The others could be 83 pence per kilowatt hour. So this is an issue here to try to understand it. So basically, when you go to charge your vehicle may be, say, for example, let's say 10%, and you want to charge it up to, say, 90%. You may have to charge it by, say, let's say it could be about 60 kilowatt, to get you from that 10 to the 90. And so when you get that 60, then you then multiply the 60. So you do 60 times 0.89. That will give you the rate for Shell. We will get into some of these calculations, but obviously, just to give you an idea, something like that could cost you between 49 and 55 pounds. But assuming that you use a BP Pulse and you have also subscribed, if you just use the BP Pulse with your card, you may be paying 77 pence per kilowatt hour. And therefore, if you multiply it by the 60, you may then find that your bill is about 40, let's say between 39 and 45 pounds. Whereas in Shell, you were paying 49 to 55 pounds. Then you may also probably be using some of these council points on the street, which is what is more practical for somebody like me that doesn't have a drive. So that is on condition that you have these points on your street. If you don't have the points on your street, then you just have to go to these places to use a supercharge, which can be very expensive. So if you were to use the council ones on the street, that may also cost you about, let's say, 45 pence per kilowatt hour to about 55 pence per kilowatt hour. And so the same charging that you're doing, somebody will be charging you 55 pounds, somebody will be charging you 49 pounds, somebody could be charging you 39 pounds. But if you do it overnight at home, this is for the people that are wealthy enough to have homes with a drive, then they could just plug it in, because they could have just a separate unit for their vehicle, and they could just plug it in and leave it overnight. And sometimes they are paying something like 7.5 pence per kilowatt hour. So such a person may once again go from zero to a full charge and pay as less as £5. And so what you then find is that the setup of this whole system actually exacerbate inequalities, in the sense that the person that actually have the drive, that are well off, that have the drive, are actually able to charge their car for very, very cheap. And in all fairness, if we, as a general, if people were, say, charging their cars on the supercharge for maybe 0 to 90 for, say, 15 pounds, a flat rate for everywhere, then somehow it will make a lot of sense and it will be sort of practical for everybody. But if you have a situation where you're charging at home a lot cheaper because you have the infrastructure, but then you're charging more expensive because you don't have the infrastructure at home, you are actually losing more money. And these amounts of monies can really add up, especially for the private hire users, because they are on the road every day. And therefore, on a daily basis, a private hire person could be charging their vehicles, for, say, 55 pounds a day if they should go to the supercharge, and that will just do them a day's job. However, if they were to maybe be buying normal diesel with the AdBlue or normal petrol, they could be spending even less. They could be spending about 35 pounds a day, or say 30 pounds a day, to do their daily rounds. And so these are some of the things that we as critics and as human rights advocates, we point out these things for the policy makers to actually rethink, because this is an area that, as far as I am concerned, governments should be involved in regulating this electric vehicle charging providers, to bring a more uniform sort of pricing with a much tighter band for variation, so that there isn't that huge variation, because These things can cost a private hire driver, say, um, you could have a cost range of about, say, £350 per week, going down to about even less than £50 a week. Why should there be that much of a variation? Then the next question is electric. Obviously, electricity travels through a cable. So unlike like a truck that carries fuel, there is cost involved in transporting the fuel from one point to the next. And so somehow their costing, obviously tanking up, makes sense. But electric it travels through a cable. And so in reality, it should not be that expensive. It should be, so if we are indeed intending to go green. Then you have issues to do with the battery life. For example, a vehicle, one of the very nicer vehicles which we are going to go into, in the next few minutes, is the Nissan Ariya, the E-Force, which has an 87 kilowatt battery power. This is a good one, but there are some that are less. Some of them are 62 kilowatts battery power. The bigger cars, your Porsches and your e-tron, Audis and all these big cars may even have much powerful batteries that are in excess of 100 kilowatts. So all these kilowatt businesses are also another thing that can be a little bit daunting and overwhelming for the ordinary guy to understand. In the sense that, for example, if you look at the Nissan Ariya, you are basically its charging capacity, the supercharge capacity is 130 kilowatt, and then it goes down as low as 20 kilowatts. And so, you know, there are some vehicles that have much, bigger battery power and charging capacity. And so you go to a point to charge and it will probably tell you. So for example, I try to charge in Shell. They have a 175 kilowatts power machine. And sometimes when I plug it into this area, which has a maximum of 130, for one reason or the other, initially it will charge. But subsequently, when I've been there, I plug it in and it will not charge. Maybe because I don't have the app. Or, so these are all kind of weird situations that really one needs to really think about these things. But the thing is that how does the ordinary person gets around these things? Then the other thing that I also notice is that, so for example, the Nissan Ariya, the roof is like a glass panel, even though it's not pan roof in the inside. So could they have put a solar panel on top of this car so that it's kind of self-charging to some extent, so that obviously if this fleet is going to go really big in the future, could they put these panels, solar panels, on top of these cars just to kind of have some sort of inbuilt minimum charge so that these cars do not really go out completely? So, for example, I've had an experience that one time I was using this car and then it was like 5% left. And if for one reason or the other, I couldn't find a station, I only had like about 15 miles to drive, then that car would have stopped in the middle of the road. And unlike a petrol car where you could use a tank to go and get petrol to come back and fill it, I would have had to be towed. And maybe where the car would have stopped would have been a challenging place. Are you with me? Could have been in the middle of road whilst driving and it stopped and there's a truck behind you. So these are some of the challenges. When I started to have this experience, I then started to think that, okay, how about a situation where, say, let's say 2030, Most of the cars in the M25 or in the London area are all full electric. There are no solar panels on the roof. But then one day there's a crisis where there's a total power outage. Will all these cars stop on the road? That is, if they don't have the capacity to, there isn't the capacity to charge them because of something that has happened to the power stations or whatever. That means we are going to have all these vehicles come to a grind or a halt in the streets of London. But when you get the power up, how then do you now start to charge these vehicles that are stuck in the middle of the road? Do you go with a truck that has got power on it to charge them to get them moving? So these are some of the practical things that it needs to be thought through well. It needs a lot of thinking before we take that deep dive, because otherwise we could find this type of a crisis once the fleet starts to build and we don't have the capacity to charge them. Because some of the experiences that I've had is also the fact that, let's say it tells me there's a BP pulse charging spot for me to use. When I get there, it's only one unit, because I'm getting there thinking there will be about 5 units let's say at a filling station or some hotel or some place. When I get there, there's only one unit. And then the problem is that as I get there, it could be that there's somebody just come before me. And the average charging time is 1.5 hours. So that person starts to charge 1.5 hours. I then have to go and wait. Because let's say on the situation where I had only 5% a battery power, I couldn't move any further. So I stay at the same place for that person to finish. Takes them about an hour and a half. And then I then go in to charge for about an hour and a half. That's taking 3 hours of my time that I could be using to do some productive stuff. I'm actually sitting there charging. What does this mean for the private hire driver? It's even worse, because the time that they are supposed to be using to work, they could easily run out of battery power, because on average, one could just put the average of these full charge to about 220 miles. Obviously, some vehicles could come in with, say, 300, and the area, for example, says 311. But in reality, when you have all the units, your lighting and everything on, this will do you just about 280 miles. So if you put the average to 220, a private hire person on average will use 220 in a day very easily. And so in the course of their work, they run out of battery, then they have to go to a place to try to charge, and that takes them, it could take them anything between 2 and 3 hours, by which time, this is adversely affecting their work. So these are some of the ideas that consideration of these vehicle producers should look at using the glass paneled roofs to have some sort of inbuilt solar panels, so that these solar panels are automatically charging the battery. Maybe it needs to be topped up, but that will mean that you place it in a situation where the vehicle can never really ever stop for one reason or the other. But they should always, this solar panel should always somehow keep a minimum running thing. Obviously, maybe with some sort of warning that if it's run down all the time, it may maybe reduce the battery life. This may sort of serve as a deterrent for, obviously, the vehicle owner not to exhaust the vehicle to that point where the solar panel really kicks in. But in my opinion, this is how, if we are going to go all electric, then we need to have those solar panels in the roof of these buildings, these vehicles, to ensure that there isn't a point where these vehicles can really come to a halt. So that is one thing. And so at this stage, we are probably going to move on, to look at the various charging points. So the first one will be mainly the filling stations. Shell does have probably the largest capacity. Shell, most of the Shell stations, if they do have these charging points, they tend to have about, let's say, about 6 or 7 of them, which is pretty good. Next one will probably be BP, where the once again they may have one or two, the BP Pulse, one or two. There are some other independent, like I don't know if it's called Greenleaf or one of these independent filling stations. They also have an EV charging box or units, and they can also have quite a few of them. But the big ones, obviously those leading the pack, is basically are the Teslas, because they actually have been in this industry longer. They have the better supercharging units, and their fleet or probably their network may also be a lot bigger. But obviously, Teslas are not for the ordinary guy. In some of my research, in speaking to certain people that have been using these electric vehicles for a much longer period, they came to the conclusion that Tesla obviously are the very best in terms of its battery and the technology and the vehicle technology. However, when it comes to say the comfort of the vehicle and the maneuverability of the vehicle, the what comes out is that it kind of it gives you that futuristic feel, but then you're sort of you are in a vehicle and you feel like you're probably like in an office. It can feel a little bit bare in the way that it is. Obviously, it's got the speed, it runs. So this is one of the things about electric vehicles. They run very fast and they are very smooth, which obviously we know that Tesla is in there with that. But then the challenge that you have is that sort of that comfort and the maneuverability. This is where a vehicle like the Nissan Ariya E-Force with the 87 kilowatt battery really tops it, in the sense that it has a decent battery. It takes off brilliantly. It's the interior is futuristic, but it also gives you the comfort. And not only that, it's maneuvering it is just brilliant. This is just because Nissan, they have been in the car industry for a much longer period than Tesla has. And so therefore, they are now combining their experience in the design, obviously in the way that they design their vehicles, and obviously putting in also a good battery. So it's a very nice car, and highly recommended. But it's the challenges that you face finding these electric points. So your first bit is the charging these filling stations. Then you also have places like these sort of double tree hotels and all these big hotels. Some of them may have a BP Pulse charging point, which is a fast charge, and even there is that issue about what is the fast charge. So with the fast charges as well, Shell will have machines that are charging at 175 kilowatt hour, and let's say the BP Pulse is charging at 50 kilowatt hour. And so when you put your vehicle up to the Shell, it will charge a lot quicker than it will on the BP Pulse. And then you have your next spot will be probably the points in the roads by the councils, that you probably find that they will probably have a charging capacity of 22 kilowatt hour. That means that when you put your vehicle there to charge from say let's say 15 to 100%, it might take you about 3.5 hours to charge. Then you have these places, the electric poles with these charging points where you can do your charging overnight. These could be about 7 kilowatts hour. that means you need to leave the vehicle there maybe 10 to 12 hours overnight to charge. These will cost you a lot cheaper, but once again, you need to have those apps to make it work for you. And so, it's a whole complex process. And so, in the next video, this is done in two parts. This is just talking about the practicality of the electric, having these electric vehicles. Our next video, we delve into the details, some of the articles that have been written on this subject, and just to look at what the mayor of London is saying, and and how practical these things are. But in my own opinion, what we are ready for really is the hybrid, is the self-charging hybrid. That is what we are ready for, because bear in mind that all the roads in London have been reduced, the speed have been reduced to 20 miles an hour. And so if you have a self-charging hybrid, which I've had before, a Toyota Prius, what it is that once the speed drops to less than 25 miles per hour, it kicks into electric. Are you with me? So in effect, if all the roads are 20 miles per hour and you have this, this hybrid, this self-charging hybrid, then therefore, because they are going at 20 miles an hour, they will always be in an electric mode. And this way, this is the infrastructure that I think is available now, and obviously should be made mandatory for all private hire, or even for all fleet in London, to go hybrid, self-charging hybrid, obviously with either fuel, petrol or diesel, because they will be moving less than, say, 25 miles per hour, and therefore they will be automatically electric. And so, yeah, that we are ready for. Then that then buys us a lot of time to put in this massive infrastructure capacity for the electric. So, in conclusion, from the positives and the negatives, the positive is that obviously it's all green and everything, but the negatives are that we are probably not ready. So thank you once again for watching, and we will continue from our next video. All right, thank you.